So here I'm going to kind of riff for a while on this concept of right view. In the Buddhist tradition, there's the Eightfold Noble Path, and the first step on the path is right view. Essentially having the right view, outlook, mindset, something akin to that. And what I want to kind of play with here is that coupled with another concept which I've seen most closely associated with the Zen tradition of Buddhism, which is no view, right? Essentially having no outlook, no mindset. And these ideas have been kicking around in my mind, how to square them, how do they make sense, how do they flow together? And I came up with kind of an explanation for it, or kind of a model for it. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and share here. And so what I'm going to do at the top here is we'll anchor right view. It's kind of our subject here. And then down here, I'm going to put no view. And this idea of no view, again, I said it's associated with Zen. I think when you think of Zen koans, there are hundreds out there. The sound of one hand clapping. If a tree falls in the middle of a forest, does it make a sound? Those are kind of, the standard ones, just kind of fell off my lips. But if you go and you look at them, I think what you'll find is they're generally kind of like this gong for the brain. Kind of this it's almost kind of like in the Looney Tunes cartoons when Wile E. Coyote's running and then he is running on air chasing the Roadrunner, and it's only when he kind of looks down that he realizes he's not standing on solid ground anymore. I think koans kind of do that to the brain, to the part of the brain that's constantly trying to make sense of things and believes it's standing on a solid ground of sense. It kind of throws that out, throws it for a loop, and invites the mind to live in a more suspended state where we're not kind of anchored to whatever our mindset is, whatever our current attitude is. It kind of frees us from that and kind of leaves us in a space maybe akin to like a mental vacuum where we feel like we're not sure what we're thinking at that moment. We may not be thinking anything at that moment. And so that's kind of that state of no view. I think if we look at nirvana in the Buddhist tradition, which is a translation of, blowing out, like, candle blowing out or something like that. I think one of the things that's getting blown out is essentially view. And what I think we have here as a dynamic is we have our current view, which is a confusing view, right? And I say it's confusing in the sense that not that it's confusing you when you think about it in a way that's obvious, or that if you speak to other people who have the same view that it's confusing. I'm looking at that in kind of a zoomed out, maybe almost absolute perspective, saying that if it's anything other than no view, it's essentially a confused or confusing view. So we could even take this and kind of quantumly suspend it. It's confused and it's confusing. It's reflecting some misunderstanding about the way things are, right? And we can even go back to the Buddha's Four Noble Truths, the truths of suffering, and the fact that suffering stems from wanting. So anytime we find ourselves craving and kind of chasing our cravings or fighting our cravings, right, that's a reflection of confusion. We could also trace it back to the Buddhist notion of the kleshas, the three defilements that support suffering, the root one being ignorance or misunderstanding. And you can see that one antidote for ignorance or misunderstanding is to actually hold no view. So if the cause of suffering is ultimately ignorance or confusion, that means we're holding on to some belief or view that's incorrect. We could see that no view would be an antidote to that, essentially. And I think ultimately that's the truth, that if we can get ourselves to a position where the view that we identify with most, or the view that we most commonly kind of manifest is no view, that's a way that we essentially avoid the confusion caused by our false beliefs or our mistaken beliefs. And this then allows us to have the clearest connection with the world, the clearest engagement with life, leads to the minimum of suffering and the maximum of experience, enrichment, thriving, all those things. Okay, so we've got the confused or confusing view here, right? And then we've got over here what we might call a less confused view, less confusing view. And, I've been trying to think of examples we could give for this. Inevitably, they end up being kind of personal, so they may not be as helpful. But, for example, one relatively simplistic one would be something like this. Let's say that I'm feeling aggravated based on someone else's behavior, someone else's conduct, right? It's a confused view if I hear and I see this person and they're doing whatever they want. They're speaking a certain way, they're wearing the jersey of my rival team, they're wearing a political thing that aggravates me or upsets me. Kind of pick your pet peeve, right? Person one and person two. In this case, I'm person two, and I'm all wound up because person one is doing whatever, right? Holding a little banner for a team I don't like. The confused view is to look at them and to say, that's the problem, right? That's the problem. I think a less confused view would be repeat that same situation. Got their little banner, right? They're happy. I've got my prejudice. I'm all upset because I'm seeing this. A less confused view is if I remember, though, it's never the other person who's actually causing my aggravation. The aggravation is always a reflection of something within. And so here, right, I was directing the blame on the other person. Now a less confused view would be to direct the blame inward. Now it's still a confused view because we're using blame, right, which is negative. Anytime we're using anything negative, that's a symptom of confusion. It's not a bad thing, right? We're wherever we are in our process. But it's an indicator that there's some fundamental misunderstanding still operating within us. This is less confused, though, because at least I'm directing my attention inwardly, which is the only direction I can cause any meaningful change to happen. As long as I'm playing this game, I'm always going to be externalizing my issues and just creating more drama in my life. Here, at least, this inward direction, even though it's a blaming one, is at least closer to the truth because I am directing it inward. Then we've got no view, right? And no view is both what it says, which is no view, but it's not something that lives in denial. It's not sticking our head in the sand, so to speak, or plugging our ears and closing our eyes and going la la la, right? That's essentially escapism, right? Denial of the world. No view denies nothing, right? It accepts that everything is. It just doesn't see these as something worth fixating on, right? Or an attitude that we need to cling to, right? So I don't need to cling to externalizing. I don't need to even cling to internalizing. If I have no view, I have a full recognition of the situation, and I don't need to essentially adopt either posture. And from this position of no view, we have the ability to actually recognize a relationship here, right? So I drew a negative over here. I drew a positive over here. Why? Because we're moving. It's kind of like getting warmer, getting colder, right? If you're going outward, up, you're getting colder. If you're going inward, up, you're getting warmer, right? You're getting better to the truth. So that's why I'm polarizing them here like this. In the no view, what we're able to do is to recognize the positive, recognize the negative, recognize that they are actually complements of each other, right? That actually in the evolution of a person, you have to have this step first, right? You have to start at this rudimentary step to then move to this step and to recognize how this move is actually serving you more than this move, right? So we recognize the evolution, recognize the complementary nature of them. And then essentially what we're do is we're free to make a choice in a moment that's most suitable for us. And by having no view, because we're not clung to this, we may say, okay, here's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing that this is how I used to do it. I used to blame outwardly, right? And that wasn't really working for me. I then started directing my blame inwardly, and that was better. That was an improvement. But maybe now from this perspective, I'm realizing, okay, blame is still kind of a sticking in my craw a little bit. It's maybe creating an issue. I'm directing inward, I'm getting more results than before, but because that blame negativity is still there, I'm struggling to actually make progress the way I know I could. Maybe I'm seeing other people making progress, manifesting better, healing more effectively, and maybe so it's from this position of no view, right, where I'm not stuck in this saying this is the right way, and I'm not stuck in this saying this is the wrong way. or vice versa. I've essentially detached myself from the views, not associating with them, not thinking that one of them is right or wrong. That allows me to begin to recognize the upsides and downsides of each one, and to recognize that, yes, while this is an improvement, there's still some additional improving to do. There's still some negative in this positive. And I really think it's only from this position of no view, right, where we're able to recognize the complementary nature of these, and then to be able to do some real assessment on this and recognize how the next time around I want to improve that. So then let's watch how that could be done in a dynamic. All right, so we've got the same triangle, the no view, the confused and confusing view, and the less confused and confusing view. And one thing you'll notice here, one of the reasons we have this kind of complementary nature up here is because by their wording, these are relative to each other, right? This is confused and confusing. Notice this one is also confused and confusing. It's just less so. That's why it is relatively positive to this negative, but it's not an absolute. And let me show you what I mean by that. So now the view down here is going to be the same one we had over here before. So we have person 1, person 2. Right, person 2, say, is listening to a podcast with a political message that gets under my skin. Oh my God, how could they possibly think that? And God, if they think that, how would they have the gall or the shame to spread their toxic, terrible idea all around, right? Where is this toxicity and terribleness? It's always in the person who's judging that, declaring that. So now what I've done is I've taken my less confused view from before, and that is now kind of my default view. And what am I doing in that confused view, right? I'm directing attention back inward, right? So I'm not externalizing it anymore, but I'm doing it with blame. What would be a less confused view there? Right? Same situation. Person's got their podcast going. It's driving me nuts, or I'm telling myself that it's driving me nuts. Really, I'm driving myself nuts. And this is actually a friendly, helpful alert, like, hey, buddy, you've got some nuttiness in you that's still circling around. I'm going to not trigger you, but kind of bring your attention to it. And then it's really your freedom what you do with this information. But this is nothing other really than a blessing. We call it an aggravation, a provocation, right? Something like that. It's really a blessing. So now a less confusing view. Here I was directing inward with blame. Now perhaps I direct inward with curiosity. Right? So the issue before that we had spotted from our detached view and no view, right? We appreciated the relative dynamic of these, how they really serve off of each other, how in the flow of time, this is actually a necessary evolutionary step for this one to come about. We do the same thing here and we say, okay, I like this trend, right? I recognize this one really is kind of more the negative one. Why? Because I'm directing a blatantly negative emotion or attitude, blame, inward on myself. This one's an improvement because I'm directing curiosity in. And we may work this for a while, right? And we may be proud for a while and say, okay, hey, we're doing good stuff, right? We'll get benefit out of this, and we do. Eventually, though, we then move to the no view stage. Again, we do that same thing. We appreciate the evolutionary dance here, the way they're complementary, the way they are really relative to each other. It's not like this is good and bad, right? This is just less confused than this one. And the only way we know that it's less confused is because we've experienced this first, experienced this one now, and realized the relatively positive direction of this trend, right? But then from the no view, we say, okay, well, let's now take an honest look at my new approach, right? The thing I'm doing lately. Maybe I'm proud of this, maybe I'm happy with this, but in no view, I can kind of detach from that, right? Detach from my pride of ownership. Maybe I think I thought of this, maybe I thought I originated this, and so I'm like, oh man, this is so good, this is so perfect. Notice though, when we're clinging to that, right, we're introducing a stiffness, right? We're not allowing ourselves to flex, to experiment, to learn, to improve. That's something we can do from no view, right? Because we're not attached to these anymore. And so now we're looking at it, we're saying, okay, how is this curiosity working for me down here, right? I'm directing my attention inward, good. And I'm not doing blame anymore. I'm doing curiosity. That seems an improvement. But what's the downside of curiosity, right? And what I found through my experience is with curiosity, I tend to get too cerebral and intellectual. I tend to speculate too much. I tend to kind of chase theories around. I'm looking for epiphanies, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that when I'm doing that, what I'm doing is I'm actually then going back up into my head. When really what I want to be doing is engaging that aggravated energy inside myself. I want to actually be feeling it more in my body, attending it more in my body, and not intellectualizing it, not conceptualizing it, not cognizing it, which with curiosity, I tend to do, right? Curiosity directs me toward it, right? Ooh, I wonder what's going on there. But then I just kind of instinctively, addictively go back up into my brain, and now I'm thinking about this and all the things I associate with it instead of directly engaging with it. And so then having made that realization, I may go back here, right? And now in my view here, right, I've got curiosity, and I move to another one, which is perhaps compassion, right? Now compassion, ooh, now it feels like I'm moving in an even better direction. And you can see how this cycle will repeat itself again and again and again. And I think this is essentially how we evolve. I'm gonna pause this for a garbage truck.